Welcome back to the Ascension Facilitated Sessions, where medicine, mentorship, and mastery unite. I am your co-host and moderator, Dr. Darren Jackson, and today's episode is a special one. You're in for a treat. Today, DT, we are cracking the code. I am joined here by my co-host and expert facilitator,
Dr. David Taylor. Welcome, future doctors.
DT, let's play a little game. Just to kind of bring home the points of cracking the code, what does the ADCOM really want from our students? I brought some fictional but realistic student profiles that I want to break down. Should we jump in?
Let's jump into it.
Okay, so case one, profile one. We have Maya, right? 3.95 GPA, MCAT 519, shadowing, 3 publications, founder of a campus-free clinic. That's high level stuff.
Yes, indeed.
Clear mission alignment and excellent personal statement.
Well, clearly this particular candidate for admission to medical school is a highly competitive candidate. We're going to break down a little bit later on as we know how we're going to evaluate it, but just on the initial credentials you presented, that would be a classic highly competitive candidate that I know our future doctors also aspire to. Everyone wants to aspire to be the best, right?
Right. All right. So we got Maya. Now let's look at Jamal's case, right?
All right.
Jamal, GPA 3.6, MCAT 509, 2 years clinical experience, leadership in campus diversity organizations. Good story, but some gaps in, the academic rigor. What do you say about Jamal?
A very solid scholar, obviously, solid credentials there, but every time we see quote unquote gaps in an academic record, the committee will review that very carefully. Of course, we'll explore that a little bit more later in this FS. But overall, this is a reasonable applicant for admission consideration to medical school. Certainly not as competitive as the first applicant, but both would certainly be considered by the ADCOM.
Okay. So we had Maya, which you would say is a very competitive student.
Very competitive, highly competitive. Jamal, solidly competitive.
Okay. So let's meet our third student. All right. Our third student name is Karen, right?
Okay.
3.3 GPA, MCAT 499, caregiver experience, mental health advocate, and a first-gen student, right? Low scores, but powerful background story.
Yes. And so, again, this is where the insider information of the ADCOM is going to play a role. The numbers tell some of the story, but not the whole story. And as we explore in this FS how an ADCOM will evaluate this candidate, we'll find that some medical schools will find this value candidate very intriguing and want to explore more and may, in fact, give reasonable admissions consideration, may even extend an interview to some of your surprise, because many believe that if I have the high grade point average, competitive MCAT score, and then those other professional experiences, that is really the key to open the door. There is a lot of truth there. However, there are some other keys that can open that door if we have the right mentorship and the right information that inform how we then have the ADCOM consider our application. So our last scholar is one that we, essential medical educators, find ourselves a lot of times encouraging and nurturing because the scholar's been told medical school is not for you. Well, we're here to affirm medical school is for you, and through some effective mastery of skills and tools that we'll provide, we can actually elevate that value candidate for more consideration for medical school.
And this keeps triangulating what we continue to speak about that expert mentorship, that tailored mentorship, that non-cookie cutter mentorship, because otherwise Karen would not know that medical school is still within her reach, right?
That is correct. So again, as I talk with our scholars, we want excellence. All medical schools want excellence. Everyone desires excellent academics. We also recognize, though, that there could be areas of improvement for a particular scholar, and if we can help the scholar improve in those areas, and we have those other professional skills and experiences that we desire a future physician, then that valued scholar, yes, is highly welcomed into the medical school, because we need that type of scholar in the profession of medicine. One who is not only willing to take accountability for their academic journey, but is willing to work, grow their skill sets, own that responsibility, and continue to give us those excellent relational, interpersonal skills, empathy skills, compassion, and engagement that we need to help our valued patients.
So what about studentdoctor.net and Reddit that is telling Karen that she is not a candidate? And we're going to get into that later on in today's facilitated session, because we have this segment here called Mythbusters, and we're going to bust a few myths that we find from a lot of our student doctor and pre-med and medical threads online, because some of these things really need some addressing, don't you think, DT?
Absolutely. And that's why FS is so important, and we encourage our future doctors to regularly attend FS,
Yes,
so you can get the right information to make the right decision at the right time.
Okay. So let's go back into cracking the code, right?
All right.
What does ADCOM want from the student? I want to break this down into some really targeted points, some talking points. So I want to first start off with the primary application.
All right. Sounds like we're about to go deep.
Yeah. So
All right.
this is where the customized advising, comes in, because you have to look at it as steps. So I want to break our conversation down into the primary application and what goes into that, the secondary application, and then letters of recommendation.
Okay.
And then we'll have a whole separate piece for the actual medical school interview coming up on a later facilitated session.
Absolutely. I'll be there for that too.
Yeah. But I think that this is a good starting point for cracking the code. So let's go to talking point one. Let's break it down into primary application. Give us some insight about the GPA, the MCAT, the personal statement. Let's just start there.
All right. Well, the grade point average is always very interesting, because if we notice, DJ, when you gave me the grade point average, you did not tell me, was that the overall grade point average or the science grade point average?
Yes.
We are very interested in the science grade point average as one indicator of, will the scholar be able to handle the rigor of biomedical science in medical school, which is essential, of course, for problem solving in patient care. Now remember, it's only one factor. So overall grade point average is important to us to look at the totality, if you will, of your academic scholarship. Are you a consistent scholar who engages his or her journey in a meaningful and purposeful way, right? That's going to be key for us. But then we look closely at the science grade point average. If we go a step further, all science grade point averages are not equal. You could have a 3.0. I could have a 3.0. Perhaps you took 2 or 3 upper division science courses in one semester and earned that 3.0. I completed 1 upper division science course in that semester. This is beyond, of course, the prerequisites for which we expect all scholars, obviously, to complete. So if we're thinking about which scholar may have a handle on more rigor, meaning your ability to handle the difficulty of sciences, your 3.0 is more meaningful to us, science grade point average, because you completed 3 science courses. I completed 1 in that same semester. In medical school, we'll have multiple science courses that we're completing. So when we look at this science grade point average, we're evaluating it by each of your undergraduate years in terms of the number of science hours in each of those years, And what were your scores? Did they go up? Were they the same? Did they go down? So it's important to have the mentorship and the academic advising to help you look at your application from that perspective when you're preparing it. But in a larger perspective, the goal, as we said in one of our earlier facilitated sessions, is to be a master learner as part of our professional identity, to give our best, because our learning is setting the foundation for patient care, for problem solving and patient care. And we're balancing that with wellness. So yes, the grade point average is very important, but we can see there are a lot of layers to the grade point average. Those are a couple of the considerations. We'll talk more about grade point average, of course, as we move along in the presentation. Now, you remember when you were undergraduate, a pre-med scholar, what was the perspective that you were given about your grade point average?
Oh, so long ago. Let's see if I can dust the cobwebs off. Yeah, obviously the preeminent narrative was that the higher the GPA, the better. And so someone who took, most, science-driven courses, who also maintained a very high GPA, fared well in the application process, while someone who may not have had a strong science GPA, which then obviously will affect the total GPA, that their chances are a little bit less likely.
Yeah, it's always interesting because there's some truth in that statement, but there's a lot of false information in that statement, because we have to carefully look at, as the admissions committee, the ADCOM, what has been the pathway for that scholar's grade point average. Remember, if I get even more granular, we have a lot of non-science majors who we also love in medicine, because non-science majors, based on their other majors and the humanities, etc., think in a more global way, which is a good skill to have in medicine. Non-science majors may eventually complete all the prerequisites in science and take a few upper division science courses and be as competitive as a science major. So the grade point average has multiple layers to it, and it's incumbent upon each of our scholars to assure that you have a meaningful relationship with an academic advisor who will take the time to break this down for you, because there are a lot of layers to it in terms of how we evaluate the grade point average and how does that impact your competitiveness. Because we're going to move into the next factor, which is the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test score. That score can also impact, of course, consideration for medical school admission, and it is an indicator of one's ability to think about information in science and non-science. Watch that one. Science and non-science areas for problem solving in medicine. And many scholars believe the MCAT is only a content exam that focuses on your prerequisites, and that's incorrect. So in the future facilitated session, we'll have a whole facilitated session just on the MCAT. But that score, for competitiveness, we would prefer that a scholar have a score starting at a 507, which puts you around the 72nd percentile rank. But to be competitive at many medical schools, if you're looking only at MCAT score, a competitive score starts between, depending on the school, a 509 to a 511. So that's moving you closer into the mid 80th percentile rank, 82nd, 84th percentile rank. By the time you get to 512, about the 86th percentile rank. That's a competitive score if you're looking at MCAT at only one attempt and with subsection scores at 125 or better. There's a lot of areas we're evaluating there. But the take-home point we want you to understand about the MCAT, it is an indicator of your ability to problem solve with science and non-science information. It is not a recall exam. So from that perspective, when we see that score, that's one indicator, along with your grade point average. Specifically, your science grade point average will help you with the science sections of the MCAT. But the non-science section, it won't help you with.
Now, it's interesting because when I first gave the cases, you said that I didn't make the distinction whether or not this was the science GPA or the total GPA.
Correct.
Now, for the MCAT, I also did not make the distinction whether or not this was the first time that the student was taking the exam or
the second or third time.
So tell us a little piece about that.
Correct. And you also gave me the total score. You didn't give me the subsection scores.
No, I did not.
And so, again, if we're focusing only on the MCAT as one variable, each time we take the MCAT, it may impact our competitiveness. The goal that ADCOM, that we desire for you as future doctors in evaluating an MCAT, is that you take it only once. That suggests to us that you have completed a level of mastery learning and that you have engaged this exam ready to be an excellent thinker, a problem solver for medicine. If you take it a second time, that's not concerning to us a second time. There is a expectation. If you take it a second time and your first score was not reasonably competitive, starting around that 507 or better, the expectation is that your score will increase. Now, after 2 attempts, there's concern. There's concern that you may not have had appropriate academic advising to help you navigate the thinking skills of the exam. And that gets into the individual mentorship that's going to be required that we provide Ascension medical educators to help you consider, before I take that exam again, what is needed to be successful. But when I do take it again and you are successful, how do I actually share with the ADCOM, the admissions committee, why I needed 3 or 4 attempts to take this exam?
Gotcha.
We want to know that.
Gotcha. So this is kind of getting into the territory and segueing into our first myth buster. So throughout the facilitated sessions, we will have different segments where, certain myths that is very prevalent throughout the pre-med and medical community, we'll discuss and kind of break down. So the first myth is coming from Student Doctor Network. And this person states that the more difficult science majors would be looked at more favorably, but also if the GPA drops below 3.7 to just give up on medical school immediately. Also was under the impression that the letter of recommendation hunt should begin first semester freshman year. Now, we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's a real interesting piece about the GPA because they're saying that more difficult science majors would be looked at more favorably. But where does that leave our sociology or psychology majors or, non-science-based majors? Or what is the conversation to be had around the student on Student Doctor Network who is saying, don't go for the hard sciences. If you just major in a moderately rigorous major, non-science, and get a 4.0, you will be just as competitive with the admissions committee as someone who took physics and maybe had a slightly lower GPA.
A lot in there, right? And this is one of the challenges and why we have to have FS to give that right information.
Right.
Let's start with why we are in this journey. It's part of your calling to medicine to be able to problem solve to help future patients. So the goal first should not be, should I take hard courses? Should I take easy courses? Should I be a non-science major or a science major? The goal starts with whatever my interests are on this journey. I'm becoming a master learner so I can help people.
And that feeds into that discussion that we talked about defining early your professional identity.
Exactly, DJ. As you said earlier, that ties into part of our wellness because our wellness says, what's my purpose? When I have a purpose with intention, I have interests, I balance it with other, of course, wellness strategies, then I can focus on my learning. So we're starting out there for if my interest is music, but I also want to help people, I recognize I'll be doing a whole degree in music, but I'll also be doing my prerequisites, and I'm going to try to excel at both. Because quite frankly, there is information I learn from understanding music that actually can help in medicine. A whole separate facilitated session on that one. But that's as one exemplar to bust the myth. It doesn't matter whether I'm a science major or a non-science major. As you said, it's about what's my purpose, which then sets the stage for I want to become a master learner in that area. So if I have that disposition, the other noise is put aside. I'm giving my best, and the goal is to make sure I'm being proactive with my faculty and academic advisors so I continue to give my best. When I do that, the grade point average, science, and overall comes together.
Okay. So you gave us some pretty good information about the MCAT, and there's a lot of different pieces to it. And it almost seems as though when looking at the things that the admissions committee considers, many students look at the MCAT as the end all and be all. Like that's the, as you would say, the albatross.
So it's like the albatross that they have to overcome in order to be considered for medical school admission.
So what about this? Because we talked about a first attempt, we talked about the second attempt. Now, what about the student who is in a mindset where the application cycle is getting ready to come up, right? Because this is bringing us into another myth that was very popular when I was an undergrad, is to hurry up and take the MCAT before the cycle starts, or to have a score once the cycle begins because you're going to lose your spot. What do you tell the student who's getting advice that may not necessarily feel all the way ready to take the exam? Their practice scores are not reflective of the best quality that they feel that they can put forth on the MCAT. However, the application cycle is opening up in a few days, and they were always told that they have to have their application in first day.
DJ, that is still the number one challenge for scholars to make what I call a realistic and informed decision about where am I. I want every future doctor to think about it this way. Let's say it's my first time taking the MCAT. And we've already talked about a score of 507 upward puts you in a reasonable position if we're looking only at the MCAT score. If I'm not prepared and my practice scores are showing me I'm not prepared, I take the exam and I get a very modest to low score. What have I accomplished? I'm going to complete an application and submit the low score. So that is where the accountability as a future doctor comes in. A lot of times we may not always be accountable or realistic because we have common sense. Because what would naturally happen? Either I'm going to submit the application with that low score, or as we see, I race to take the exam again.
Yeah, because it's very interesting that, and that's why the mentorship piece and the custom advising is important, because as I said, when I was pre-med undergrad, the driving narrative was to hurry up and get your application in. And it seems like that narrative, that myth, is a big driver to the multiple attempts. and just looking at, our student profiles that we just talked about, and you already making that distinction about what the ADCOM is looking at. They're looking at the rigor of the GPA, science versus total. They're also looking at the MCAT, not only the percentile that you're in, but how many attempts you took it. And then even in that attempt breakdown, it's how are we progressing over attempts?
Absolutely.
Right. So if you're stuck in that mindset of, let me just get a score in because I need to put my application in, then it can kind of, it can mess up your chances. Now that brings us into another discussion, because when we talked about 3 different student profiles, right? Mm-hmm. We had the moderate, we had the highly competitive, the moderately competitive, and the simply competitive student, right? Now, when we're talking about timelines for applying and putting in this application, we figured that the application cycle starts around April, May time?
Yeah, May time. May is when it opens up.
Gotcha. And so we're around April, May, we're gearing up for the start of the application cycle. And we have these 3 different profiles.
Yes.
Highly competitive, moderately competitive, and simply competitive. What is your advice for all 3 of these students in terms of timeline to put in their application? Is the simply competitive person putting in the application at the same time as the competitive person? Are we adding our application in day 1 in May, or should we piece this out? Give us some insight in terms of what is a strategy based upon taking a realistic assessment of where we are as to when we should be applying in the cycle.
DJ, this is probably one of the best questions. And again, one of the most underestimated decisions that needs to be made because of what I call cookie cutter advising.
We don't like cookie cutter.
Cookie cutter advising, you're all just like the same cookie. We can stamp the cookie. You all come out to this beautiful cookie and we give you the same ingredients. You all will get some aspect of how we're going to make this future great physician, but you're each unique and different. We cannot have cookie cutter advising. Cookie cutter advising says, get it in early.
That's all.
Submit that application early, right, DJ? That's what you hear.
All 3.
Get it in early. So all 3 of those students should submit the application early. Now, listen carefully. All 3 of those applications are not going to be evaluated equally in certain timelines. What do I mean by that? The most competitive applications in the country, these are scholars like Maya, and they may even have credentials stronger than Maya. That's what's coming in June, July, and August. So if I submit my application, let's say I'm moderately competitive, it's possible I could get consideration. It depends on the medical school, but it's less likely. And so I'm left with, will that medical school consider me a little bit later on, or will they decline me? Depends on the medical school. And you don't know that internal because our future scholars, you're not sitting at the table. This is where the mentorship and the advising and the expertise, individual advising, we can look at the schools of your interests and we can advise you based on our experiences on what's likely to happen based on your profile.
So what you're saying is Jamal, Maya, and Karen should not all be submitting, for the most part, they should not be all submitting their application in the same month.
That is correct. Maya, in essence, could submit her application anytime. Jamal and Karen need to be strategic. They have a lower probability if they submit their application in May, June, and July for the most competitive medical schools. There's a qualifier. It depends on where you're applying. This is why we have to do some one-on-one to look at the profile that those medical schools are considering. How does it match up with your great profile, so that we can optimize your consideration for admission? So it doesn't mean that Jamal and Karen can't apply in May. But the question is, to which schools?
Makes sense.
And should they be applying a little bit later in the cycle? And to which schools?
So that's some good information about the GPA and MCAT. I always feel like those two things are always the marquee of what students feel the medical admissions committee is looking at. But let's look at some other very critical parts of your application that sometimes gets underestimated, but it is very critical. And you, as someone who has had many years on an admissions committee, can speak to the personal statement. Where does the personal statement fit in?
It's all about your journey at that point. And personal statements, they can be cookie cutter, or they can be truly personalized to the individual.
Well, what's a cookie cutter personal statement?
I think I love the sciences, and based on loving the sciences, I wanted to become a doctor. I had this event in my life early on that I had this medical concern, and because of that, wow, I had this great experience with a doctor and I want to become a doctor. What makes those cookie cutter is if they're told in a way that doesn't share real reflection. And by reflection, we mean, yes, okay, you enjoy the sciences, but what were other experiences in which you engaged a future patient or some healthcare experience where you were like, wow, I have this interest in helping people. And by being in this experience, I see now how my science really can be helpful to solving their problem. So we get a little bit deeper reflection.
And that incorporates that alignment that we keep coming back to, that piece of defining your professional identity very early in your career. Not only it helps with the wellness and balance, but it also helps here with crafting a personal statement. Because you may have very well had that health scare early on in life that drove you to want to become a doctor, or that experience that could be very cookie cutter in consideration on paper. But the way you explain it, the way you reflect on it, the way you put the pen to the pad is how you make that distinction from cookie cutter to, you being that unique candidate that stands out with this very compelling and aligned story. Your message, your identity is aligned through your personal statement, and it's communicated effectively in the personal statement.
Exactly, Darren. And then there are many different variations, of course, based on that, because each person's journey is different. And sometimes it has nothing to do with the interest in the sciences per se as the driver. It has nothing to do with a personal life, health experience, or that of a family member. It may be totally different. The person may have been teaching for many years. And yes, recognize through teaching, I see the power of how I'm encouraging people and helping them. But they also had some experience with some health exploration or some volunteer experience, and said, wait a minute, you know what? This is really gratifying. And then says, I think I want to go back to school to gain more information in preparation for being a doctor. That's like a non-traditional major. Maybe it's an education major, taught for 10 or 12 years, had some other experiences, and all of a sudden said, you know what? I feel a call to medicine. Goes back, does the prerequisites as part of a post-bac experience, and talks about that journey in a reflective and meaningful way. Now, the teacher is sharing better health.
So that was a very interesting piece about the personal statement. So we got some information about the MCAT, the GPA. All of these things are very important. And there was a piece that you touched on in the personal statement that leads me to my next point, which is professional experience, right? Now we're still under the primary application talking point, right? So this is one of the last pieces. Many freshmen, doubting freshmen, they come into undergrad, bright eyes, ready to be the future doctor. They can already have their white coat in mind, right? And they have been told, you have to find research. I remember my freshman year, I was looking for research in the neuroscience lab as soon as I got on campus. So, well, what do we say to the student that's considering professional experience? This student is considering research. They're considering clinical experience. They're considering a mix of both. What is the admissions committee looking for when it comes to those types of extracurriculars? And do they value one more than the other? Does clinical shadowing experience weigh more to an admissions committee than bench research? Do they want to see 90 hours versus 9,000 hours, and maybe even some community service? So what is the committee looking for when it comes to that research versus clinical experience? Because every pre-med student knows that is a very important piece to get your name on an authorship, to have some type of bench research to be able to talk about in your interview. Is it really weighed that much?
Another great question, Darren, and we got to qualify it by thinking through to which medical schools are you applying. And each medical school is going to train you to be an outstanding physician. But each medical school has a different educational philosophy and curriculum that supports that educational philosophy and sort of goals with how we engage the community in medicine. Let's just take two brief examples. If a school is focused on community-based medicine, the professional experiences that we're really evaluating are what's happening in community service engagement, what's happening in leadership experiences around community service engagement. Most definitely, you have to have clinical experience, shadowing experiences. Are those also in a community-based type of experience?
I see where you're going with this.
Right?
Yeah.
And research that might relate to community-based medicine or public health comes together. So it's meaningful, and perhaps I'm espousing to be an outstanding family medicine physician or community-based medicine physician. All those kind of align with my personal goals and the goals of the school.
See, I don't know if
one area.
See, I don't know if you're trying to subconsciously do this, but DT has a amazing way of triangulating. And you'll hear me continue to go back because I want all of our future doctors to continue to track. This, what you just said, is tied in very significantly with that alignment piece.
That's right. That first FS.
Yes. So it's just amazing how we come full circle with these conversations, because what you just described was making sure there is alignment.
That's right.
When your professional experiences has been considered through the lens of who you see yourself to be.
Exactly.
And those also strategic considerations have been discussed with your mentor.
Yes.
It's been put into practice through your preparation for your MCAT, through your coursework. And it seems like the piece of the puzzle kind of just falls into play. But that work comes with defining who you want to be as a profession, that professional identity.
Exactly.
And then everything seems to align from there.
Exactly. And now the ADCOM, for the schools that you are considering, staying with our example of a community-based medicine philosophy, all of the ADCOMs of those different schools, and the mentorship helps you identify those schools, they see that in your application, and it comes across as authentic. Not just put together in some cookie cutter way because I was told that's what I need to have. This is why, again, FS is so important, as you said, because Mentorship allows you to have that type of guidance.
Right.
Mentorship then allows you to take the guidance and master that path that we would be recommending to you to identify who you want to be as a future physician, and then to engage in professional activities that support those goals. That will make your personal journey and your personal statement follow through. And because, as you said, you want to help people, you're always trying to be a master learner, so your grade point average and your MCAT, with good academic advising, because there could be challenges from time to time, right, come together.
I love how these conversations come full circle, because what you just said speaks to alignment, right?
Yes.
And here we have alignment from a standpoint of early consideration of where we want to go for medical school. Because when we're talking about alignment within our personal statement, we're talking about how we view ourselves professionally, what's our professional identity, and how we're communicating that through our written statement. But then we have professional experiences, which also talks and speaks to alignment, because the things that we are doing in preparation to becoming doctors,
Yes.
how does that align with who we see ourselves in the future as future doctors and professionals? So then it brings us into another conversation about alignment when picking the medical schools, because then we even have, tying back into the professional experience, if I'm considering what medical school I'm going to, then I know that, well, this school is more focused on research. So then maybe then I may do more research hours. This school is more focused on primary care. So then maybe then I may do more clinical shadowing. So that alignment and really defining and taking a look at where you see yourself in the future as a professional is very key to kind of crafting that. And then what we do at Ascension is come in as expert mentor and take that story that you have, take that experience that you have, take what you are communicating with us as who you see yourself to be, your professional identity, and we just give you mentorship to help you craft that and give you the success that you want in admission to medical school.
Exactly, and supporting your journey. So we've had scholars who met with us who said, following professional experiences, I would like to be a physician scientist. I would like to be one who not only treats patients, maybe 40% of the time, but 60% of the time, I would like to be actually doing research on medical conditions while I'm helping to solve problems, to develop new medical innovations and interventions in patients' care. So that particular scholar, we might see a lot more research experiences, maybe upwards of 2,000 hours and a couple of publications that are showcasing their interest in being a physician scientist. We'll still see clinical shadowing experiences. We'll still see leadership and other experiences, right? Whereas in our first scholar, when I was talking about community-based medicine, we might see maybe 30 or 50 hours of research, because all of our medical schools like for you to have some research which shows you understand how we figure out there's a problem, we research it, and we look for solutions.
Now, see, I really wish I had this information when I was an undergrad, because, you know, I spent many hours doing bench research, and I kind of figured that I wasn't going to wind up doing bench research. But again, these myths that carry, you know, a lot of our pre-meds decisions that may not be the best decision for them. But we listen to these myths and we make moves. So instead of me saying, hey, I want to be more community focused, I want to be more primary care focused, or in some type of specialty, but I want to work more in a hospital setting rather than the research setting. And I would have been able to know while looking at the facilitated sessions that you don't need to find the neuro lab freshman year and freshman summer, and then sophomore year and junior year, and all throughout your years, that much research may not be as worth it for you as someone who just has the intention on being an MD, not an MD PhD, or someone who is interested in going to a medical school that focuses more on primary care or community-based doctoring.
Yes,
medicine.
exactly.
Wow, that was a lot on that first talking point. So the primary application, there's a lot of pieces to that.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, but let's switch gears to the secondary application.
All right.
Because that's where we get a lot more customized, right? The secondary application encompasses writing specifically to that particular medical school, right? So, DT, can you give us a very key point of the secondary application? Because this is very specialized. This is where aligning everything that we talked about prior to is really coming into play.
Absolutely, DJ. And it's really going to be you, future doctors, you can connect with us, and DJ will give you some information at the end of this FS, because it's really personalized. But the key take-home point is that we're going to take everything about your journey and we're going to map it to that medical school. What makes the connection for the medical school? That's the important piece for the supplemental. Why should we receive Darren versus David? It's not about academics anymore. It's about how do your professional experiences and your journey map with the goals and medicine of that school.
And that's where we come in. And so we want to continue to remind our future doctors out there that we are a DM, email, comment away, right?
Exactly.
So we want to keep that line of communication open, because essentially with the secondary application, we don't want to be cookie cutter. We don't want to mimic the alignment and goals that we submitted for application A, with application B as well. And I do think that there's something about that an admission committee could sniff out.
Absolutely. We see it all the time. And quite frankly, that's a way not to extend your consideration for that particular medical school. Cookie cutter.
So customization is the key. So we'll get into a little bit more towards the end of the episode of how you can reach out to us here at AME, and we can get that secondary pursuits underway, because like you said, it's a very customized and strategic approach. The secondary application is really what separates.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that leads us into our last talking point, the letter of recommendation.
Oh, yes.
Now, here's a myth that was discussed on a thread on studentdoctor.net. And this student is saying that one of the myths that they believe is the letter of recommendation hunt starts freshman year, day one. Now, I never heard that, but that, goes to show that there's so many different myths out there in terms of letters of recommendation. So I want you to clarify a little bit for us, DT, about that. When do we consider letters of recommendation? When should we start asking, are all letters of recommendation equal? How does the committee tease out letters of recommendation?
Lots of great questions. Future doctors, remember, the letter of recommendation is about relationship. Relationship. With whom do you have a relationship where the person writing about you can tell a story that is relevant to medicine? And DJ, a lot of times when we talk about, well, are all letters the same? The letters actually have meaning, but they have different perspectives. When you were thinking about letters of recommendation, what type of person, professional recommender, were you seeking? Who did you ask?
You wanted the top dog. You wanted the person who was big time at the university that you was able to get into their lab, do some type of research with. you wanted someone that maybe even possibly had the MD behind their names already, because for the student, that would lend to some type of credibility that a medical doctor is essentially recommending this pre-med student. And so there's a lot of different tricks, we played around with the letter of recommendation, but those were some of the main ones for me, at least, is, you want to consider someone that maybe went to the particular school that you're going to, someone who has an MD because you're trying to obtain an MD, or someone who has what the kids call clout, something in the university. They're highly tenured, they're getting a lot of research grants, and that person is, known to, name can hold a lot of weight. So tell me, what's the truth? Tease that out. What's the truth and what's the not truth?
Well, the truth is, I want you to consider what I call the 5 R's, or the 5 recommenders. And I want you to think about their perspectives. 2 recommendations come from science professors. Science professors who can speak to your ability to critically think about information that relates to how the human body functions as a forerunner of problem solving in medicine. 2 science professors. 1 physician who speaks not to your academics, but who speaks to your professional engagement and understanding of the competencies for medicine, both in terms of how you interact with patients, also in terms of how you critically think and problem solve, also in terms of your ethics and your compassionate and relational engagement. That's the 3rd recommender. The 4th recommender, someone who can speak to your servant leadership, your community service engagement. A servant leader is someone who's going to give of their time and talent, and by doing so, they help others, but they also model that behavior so other people will follow that example. Physicians are servant leaders. And then the last recommender is someone who can speak to your moral character, your ethics. And that can be a faith tradition leader, or it could be a mentor. Each of those recommenders are giving us different perspectives of who you are. Your science acumen for problem solving in medicine, science recommenders, your professional skill sets and engagement understanding in medicine, right? The physician, the faith tradition leader, moral and ethical character, and then someone who can speak to your servant leadership, any service experience in the community. That's what we want to consider.
I don't think I quite imagined it like that back many moons ago when I was a pre-med. So you said the 5 R's, the 5 recommenders.
That's
okay.
Right.
And so you need 5 recommendation letters for the application cycle.
It is not required that you have 5, depending on the individual medical school. Some medical schools have only a requirement of 3 letters. Some have unlimited letters. Some have 7 letters. So the goal is to understand the requirements. And again, with mentorship, AME, we can help you map that, because that's part of your alignment for your secondary. But remember, those letters of recommendation go to all the schools. So we need to consider perspectives. It's not to say, by the way, that we cannot have a letter of recommendation from a non-science professor, but he or she would be speaking to your global critical thinking and problem solving still as a competency in medicine. It just doesn't bring in the science component. So that's also helpful. Those are recommendations to give the different perspectives of who you are along your journey.
Gotcha.
It's not about influence. We have people who have letters from the Surgeon General and we deny them. We have people who have letters from senators and we deny them. Why? Because they're not speaking to your individual journey. That's going to be the key.
So that was a pretty heavy conversation. We talked a lot about different points that the admissions committee is looking for future physicians that will be coming to their school. So Now let's summarize, though. Let's bring the story all together. How does the ADCOM consider the primary application, the secondary application, and even the letters of recommendation? What is the aspect for the student to focus on there?
That's great, DJ, because now we're getting very close to cracking the code. So future doctors, come closer and listen in. This is where we get into finally what we refer to as the holistic review, where we're looking at the candidate's entire journey. The academics obviously are important with the GPA and the MCAT, but equally important, as we've heard, future doctors, is the story that's being told through that primary and secondary application. If it comes across authentic, the committee says, we triangulate with the letter of recommendations, the last piece. This is meaningful to us. It aligns with who we are as a medical school and how we want to train you. And now we may extend an offer of interview.
So I'm starting to see, it sounds like the alignment piece is very key here in this application cycle, because with alignment, it gives that authenticity.
Yes.
Right? And that's something that you guys on the admissions committee, the feared ADCOMs, are looking at. They're looking for that authenticity in the application. They're looking for that alignment. And it's funny because when you break it down like that, we talked about these different things, but it seems like it's a 2-digit code.
Yes.
One, because we talked about the alignment in terms of being able to have self-awareness early on in your journey of knowing your professional identity, or being able to reasonably, piece together your professional identity. Who do you see yourself in the future? But right now, future doctors, you're becoming, right? So in the becoming process, in cracking the code. So code number 1 is becoming an excellent learner, right?
Yes.
And then it seems like the code 2 is understanding your professional identity. And so it seems like if you have both of these keys in place, it gives the admissions committee that alignment, which then gives them that feeling of this is an authentic, applicant who is also aligned with the GPA that we're looking for, the clinical experience, the research, the MCAT score, the goals and aspirations within primary care or community, medicine, and ADCOM says yes. So it seems like we're cracking the code here. I don't know about you, DT. Did we crack the code?
You cracked the code.
Okay.
It's literally like having 2 digits to a combination, and your 2 digits, what's in your control, influences the ADCOM and putting the key and turning it and offering that interview, which of course will break down the importance of the interview in a future FS, right? Wow, DJ, that was a lot of information. I'm sure the scholars took a lot of great notes. Just remember, we're here to support you. We have a lot of resources for you to download from our Ascension Medical Education website, one of which is a skills inventory. There are other inventories that will help guide you through all the information we just discussed.
Yes. Coming up next, mastering the MCAT. It's a mind game, but let's outsmart it together. See you on the next FS.